Night had fallen, and we're taken to where Raon and his teammates are having dinner. Raon glances at Burin, thinking that although he was initially worried, Burin has performed far better than expected. Now, Burin no longer mentions the Zieghart name with arrogance. He prioritizes the mission and has managed to calm both the village chief and the residents. It's clear that Burin is trying to show a new side of himself. But Burin isn't the one Raon is truly worried about. Burin and the other trainees can handle the monsters without Raon's help. What matters now is the strange presence Raon has been sensing ever since they arrived in Cebu village. Although it was faint, the moment they entered the village, Raon felt something vanish into the mountains. He couldn't tell whether it was part of the Zieghart family's test or someone plotting something from the shadows. Because of that, Raon decides to look into it the next day. The next morning, Burin and the trainees head into the forest to hunt monsters. While there, Burin notices something odd. The village chief explains that monsters usually appear every winter, but this season, their numbers have tripled. That's why Cebu village couldn't deal with it alone and requested help. So far, over 100 monsters have been confirmed. If they include those not yet seen, the number could be more than 200. Additionally, none of the trainees are familiar with the forest terrain, so the village chief assigns a guide to lead them through the mountains. The guide is the fastest young man in the village. His name is Kanbar. Kanbar, however, seems anxious and doesn't fully trust the Zieghart group. Seeing his worry, Raon tells him not to be afraid and assures him that he'll return without a scratch. After that, Burin gives a briefing to the group, explaining that orcs are stronger than other monsters in terms of raw combat power. Meanwhile, goblins and kobolds use poison, so even the smallest wound could be fatal if they're not careful. He warns everyone to stay sharp. Burin then orders the 6th squad to form a defensive line to prevent the monsters from escaping. He raises his voice telling everyone it's time to hunt and urges them to show the monsters the true might of Zieghart. The group charges forward to attack. Meanwhile, Raon stays behind with Wrath Spirit, not joining the battle. Wrath Spirit mocks the trainees for shouting before the fight even began, saying it gave away their position and ruined any element of surprise. Raon replies that maybe they were just trying to shake off their nerves. Screaming might help calm them down. After all, it's their first real monster hunt. Hearing that, Wrath Spirit thinks to himself, "Isn't this Raon's first hunt too?" But Raon doesn't seem nervous at all. In fact, he observes everything calmly, as if he's a seasoned warrior who's been through countless battles. Back to the battlefield, Martha is enthusiastically tearing through monsters, but Burin reminds everyone that they should focus on the kobolds and goblins first before going after the orcs. Suddenly, some orcs break through the defensive line. Seeing this, Kanbar panics and instantly regrets volunteering as the guide. He even shuts his eyes out of fear, but Raon doesn't hesitate. He steps in and swiftly eliminates the approaching monsters. To Raon, they're nothing in the face of his power. He wipes them out effortlessly. Kanbar slowly opens his eyes, shocked to find that the monsters have already been defeated. Raon asks him if he's hurt, and Kanbar replies that he's okay. Then Raon says he has one question for him. Is there a legend or story passed down about these mountains? Something like a tale of a hidden treasure, or an incredibly powerful monster. Kanbar then mentioned that there was a story like that. According to what he knows, hundreds of years ago, the Goblin King of the Western region fought a knight on that very mountain. Kanbar also heard rumors that the Goblin King's ring was buried somewhere in those mountains. Hearing this, Raon quickly came to a conclusion. The strange presence he'd been sensing all along was actually from Eden. Eden is one of the dark forces on the continent. They formed a major faction known as Oma. Oma is made up of lunatics competing for the title of the most insane person in the world. Eden's ultimate goal is restoration. They believe that the era of despair 1,000 years ago, when monsters ruled the world, was paradise. So Eden was formed to bring back that era by reviving the god of monsters. If that were all, they'd simply be considered a bunch of madmen and wiped out. But Eden doesn't just control monsters. They can infuse monster powers into humans. What's worse is that their strength is on par with the Zieghart family, and their twisted powers are so mysterious that even the most powerful families on the continent have no knowledge of them. Still, Raon knew their methods, thanks to Darius in his past life. Back then, when Raon was carrying out a mission assigned by Darius, he encountered Eden. His entire shadow unit was wiped out, and Raon was the only survivor. At the time, Raon didn't understand what had happened, but later, he started to question everything. Darius knew from the beginning that Eden used mana stones. So, how could someone like Darius have such specific knowledge and never tell anyone, especially when he was one of the 6 emperors? Just then, Wrath Spirit interrupted Raon's thoughts, asking what he was thinking about. He could feel Raon radiating with intense anger. It turns out that just thinking about Darius was enough to make Raon boil with rage. But now wasn't the time to let emotions take over. What mattered most was facing Eden. If what Kanbar said was true, then Eden's goal was clearly the mana stone of the Goblin King. It's been centuries since the Goblin King died in those mountains, so there's a good chance that a powerful mana stone still lies buried there, and that's what Eden is after. Raon realized that Eden likely sent those monsters just to trick Zieghart into thinking the mission was complete. It was a distraction, to lure them away and keep them from interfering with Eden's real objective. Then the scene cuts to Burin, who's in the middle of battle, targeting what he believes is the leader of the monsters. Burin charges forward, hoping to finish it off with a single blow, But suddenly Martha shows up and declares that she'll be the one to take it down. After the monster falls, Burn orders everyone to wipe out the remaining enemies since their leader is already dead. Raon then turns to Kanbar and asks if anyone has ever found a gem or treasure in the mountains. Kanbar replies that when he was a child, the village chief once returned from the mountain carrying a red gemstone from the summit. Most villagers didn't know about it, but Kanbar believes that the gem is probably buried under the floor of the chief's house. Hearing that, Raon is shocked. If that's true, then the situation is far more serious than he expected. If Eden searched the mountain and didn't find the gem, they would destroy Cebu village to get it. Eventually, the group defeats every last monster. With the extermination complete, they all return to the village. There, they're welcomed warmly by the village chief and the townspeople. The chief personally thanks them on behalf of everyone. But despite the celebration, Raon still feels like something is off. Martha then asked Raon if everything had gone the way he expected. Still, she wasn't sure what Raon's true goal really was. Raon replied that he didn't quite understand it himself yet, but when the time came, he would explain everything. Martha responded by saying that Raon didn't need to worry. No matter what happened, she would follow his orders until the mission was complete. Just then, Runan approached Raon and asked what he was doing. Was something weighing on his mind? She said he didn't look okay. Raon told her that he was fine, that there was nothing wrong. Then he invited her to come along, saying the village chief was holding a celebration. But even as he said that, Raon kept thinking that Eden wouldn't make their move until the Zieghart group had left the village. For now, they would probably just keep sending monsters, and tomorrow would be the critical moment. The next day, at the edge of Cebu village, the Zieghart trainees were making their way back, believing their mission was complete. Burren, walking with the others, couldn't help but wonder why Raon hadn't reclaimed his position as leader yet. Burren felt confident that he hadn't done anything wrong in his leadership. He didn't know what Raon was trying to confirm, but he hoped that Raon recognized his ability to lead was on par with his own. Then Burren ordered everyone to pick up the pace. By afternoon, Raon suddenly told everyone to stop. The group looked around, confused as to why he was halting their march. They thought it was still too early to make camp. The sun was still up, and they could easily travel a bit farther. But Raon announced, from here on out, the real mission begins. Burren immediately asked what he meant by that. Hadn't they already wiped out the monsters? Why was Raon saying the mission was only starting now? It made no sense to him. Raon calmly replied that their mission wasn't just to kill monsters and protect the village. Burren pushed back, but we've already done that, so what's the issue? Raon answered, someone's been watching us, not long ago. Whoever it was had been observing the Zieghart team up until just an hour ago. Raon admitted that the person could have been an instructor, but he had sensed a powerful malicious intent coming from them. Raon went on to say that he had actually felt the presence even before they arrived at the village, and that same presence had disappeared toward a village about half a day away from their current location. Burren was stunned by this. He asked again, was Raon being serious? Martha then stepped forward and asked Raon if he had really sensed it before they even entered the village. Raon confirmed it. He'd felt it the moment they reached the hill near the road leading into town. Martha followed up with another question. So, is that why you gave leadership to Burren? To draw attention away from yourself? Raon nodded. Exactly. I did it to better assess the enemy. Kane, who had been listening, was amazed by Raon's ability. Even during the battle, it was clear to him Raon was already beyond the level of an average instructor. After all, even he hadn't realized they were being watched. Burren then asked Raon if that was the only reason he had been given command. Raon confirmed it. As a commander, he believed that Burren was better suited to lead the others than he was. Even during training, Burren had already shown the qualities of a true leader, one of the best among them. Because of that, their enemy likely mistook Burren as the real leader, which helped keep Raon's presence hidden. Raon praised the way Burren handled leadership during the mission. In fact, he said Burren was truly worthy of being called a Zieghart. Raon also told Burren that once they returned, he would recommend him as vice captain. Hearing that, Burren thought he might be able to compete with Raon. But then again, what Raon had done was something Burren could never pull off. So he felt like he still wasn't on the same level. Normally, monsters don't cooperate with other species. But in this mission, the monsters showed signs of coordination, which meant someone had to be controlling them. The mission the Zieghart trainees were given was to protect the village. So as long as the village was still in danger, the mission wasn't over. Raon then declared that from this point on, they would return to the village. But this time, things would be different. They'd move as quietly as possible, so no one would detect them. Disguises would help. Unfortunately, not everyone had the skills to stay hidden, so Raon didn't force the issue. Suddenly, Dorian interrupted and told Raon that he had enough disguise tools for everyone. Surprised, Raon asked when Dorian had managed to gather all that gear. Dorian answered that he had brought it just in case. Hearing that, Raon was shocked. Dorian had packed 40 different disguises, just in case. Raon then gave an order for one person to head to the nearest branch and report their situation. The rest of them would now follow his commands without question. Any disobedience would not be tolerated. 5 hours later, we shift to Eden's temporary hideout near the mountain, close to Cebu village. There, someone reported that the Ziegharts had left, and after checking the surrounding areas, there were no issues. Upon hearing the report, the Eden leader immediately gave the order to begin the operation. Then he used a skill called Restoration, transforming himself into an orc. He issued commands to the orcs: eliminate everything that stands in their way, leave no survivors. Meanwhile, the Ziegharts had already returned to the mountain near Cebu and were observing the orc army marching toward the village. Seeing this, Byrne was in disbelief. How could this be happening when they'd already wiped out all the monsters? Raon calmly told everyone to wait. It wasn't time to act yet because they still didn't know the enemy's true identity. Byrne protested, saying that if they didn't act now, innocent villagers might get hurt. They had to step in. Raon explained that if they rushed in blindly, they'd be defeated. Byrne pushed back, insisting their mission was to protect the village, so they had to fight now. But Raon reminded him their enemy was Eden. That meant they needed to be extra careful. The moment Raon said Eden, everyone froze. Even Martha immediately asked if he meant Eden from Oma. Raon nodded. Only Eden, or a monster of Lord class, could control monsters like this. That's why they couldn't afford to rush in without a plan. Byrne then admitted that he understood Eden's power, and that Raon's orders made sense. But if they didn't act soon, half the villagers would die. So was Raon really planning to just sit back and watch innocent people get attacked, waiting for the right moment? Byrne said he believed Raon was more deserving of the Zieghart name than he was. But that kind of logic, waiting while others suffered, was something Byrne couldn't accept. Because to him, raising your sword to protect the weak, right now, was the duty of a Zieghart swordsman. Then Byrne dashed forward to attack the monsters, declaring that, from now on, he didn't care whether the others followed him or not. As long as they considered themselves swordsmen of the Zieghart family, they should follow him. Hearing this, Raon turned to Raon and said she would go after Byrne, then leapt off the cliff without hesitation. Seeing Byrne act like that, the others started to realize that he had a point. Letting fear take over just because their enemies were from Eden would only tarnish the Zieghart name, especially when all of them were trainees under the command of the 6 emperors. So the other members began running forward, joining Byrne in his attack. Meanwhile, the 6th squad didn't stand idle either. They followed Byrne to support the 5th squad. All of this had already been predicted by Raon. He knew Byrne and the others wouldn't sit still in the face of injustice. They would rise to stop Eden and their monsters. That's why Raon sent a message through Aura to Runan, telling her to follow Byrne. Raon believed that Byrne, Runan, and Cain would be able to hold off Eden for a while. What surprised Raon, however, was that Martha didn't join them. He had thought Martha would be the first one to charge in, but Martha calmly said she would follow Raon's orders until the end and wouldn't act recklessly. Hearing that, Raon could only smile. He then ordered the remaining members to head toward the village and regroup with the others, but he reminded them to make sure their presence stayed hidden. He was certain Eden still had reinforcements they hadn't revealed yet. In particular, Raon still sensed a powerful killing intent coming from deep within the mountains. The other enemies could be handled by the 5th and 6th squads, but that one was dangerous if faced head-on. However, if they used assassin tactics, it might be a different story. The scene then shifts to the 5th and 6th squads engage in a fierce battle with the monsters. After fighting for a while, Byrne realized that these monsters were stronger than the ones they had faced before. Still, if the numbers stayed low, defending the village wouldn't be too hard. The real issue was Eden. They wouldn't stop at just sending monsters. Defeating these beasts wouldn't be the end of it. Byrne then told the others to watch the skies and the trees, as enemies might be hiding there. And sure enough, many soldiers from Eden's Green Phantom Corps were waiting in the trees, ready to join the battle. Byrne had expected this, but he hadn't imagined there would be this many. Even with a rough estimate, there were more than 40 enemies. Quickly, Byrne began to execute a plan. He ordered the 6th squad to hold back the monsters from entering the village. At the same time, he asked Renan to freeze the feet of the monsters and the Green Phantom Corps using her ice powers. Once they were frozen in place, Byrne would lead the charge to strike them directly. Following Byrne's orders, Renan unleashed her ability, freezing the enemy's feet one by one. As soon as they were immobilized, Byrne readied his skill and lunged into the front lines to attack. But suddenly, a Green Phantom Corps member appeared above Byrne, ready to strike. Luckily, Byrne dodged the ambush just in time. However, that wasn't the end of it. Poisoned arrows began raining down from above. To make matters worse, the enemy also released a poisonous mist across the battlefield, aiming to weaken the Zieghart troops. Realizing what was happening, Byrne quickly ordered everyone to cover their mouths. Unfortunately, it was already too late. The poison had spread, and now none of them could use their aura. On top of that, no one could move their bodies as they wanted. If things continued like this, the Ziegharts would lose for sure. Then suddenly, a massive attack burst forth, completely blocking Byrne's view. It turned out that the attack came from Martha, who had arrived just in time to help the others. After that, she ordered everyone to eliminate the enemies and not let a single one slip through. With reinforcements arriving, the 5th and 6th squads were finally saved and managed to push the enemy back. The enemy clearly hadn't expected the Ziegharts to be this strong. Just as the Green Phantom Corps were trying to retreat, the leader of Eden appeared, shocking everyone. Standing before them was a being even stronger than the Green Phantom Corps, the Green Battle Phantom. The Green Battle Phantom was one of Eden's lower-ranked executives. Byrne asked why someone like him was there, but the Green Battle Phantom ignored the question and commented that For trainees, they didn't look too bad. Judging by their strength, Martha should have already known they couldn't take him down. And yet, none of them ran away. So, the Green Battle fandom declared that he would kill them all for not knowing their limits. Then, he launched his attack. With just a single strike, Burin, Martha, and Runan were completely overwhelmed and collapsed on the spot. Seeing the three of them fall with just one attack, the other squad members began wondering, where were Raon and Kane? There was no way Raon would just sit back and watch the others get taken down like that. Then, Martha started to get back on her feet. Seeing her try to stand again, the Green Battle Phantom wasn't surprised at all. He figured Martha had sensed Eden's presence from the beginning, so it made sense. Still, to Eden, Martha was nothing more than a seed that needed to be destroyed. That's why he declared that everyone would die by his hands right then and there. But before that could happen, Raon suddenly appeared behind the Green Battle Phantom and launched a surprise attack using all the power he had. Raon believed this was his perfect chance to take him out in a single blow. Unfortunately, the attack only managed to slice off one of the Green Battle Phantom's arms. It wasn't enough to kill him. Then the Green Battle Phantom said that if he hadn't tilted his body just in time, Raon would have cut his head clean off. Raon replied that he must be insane for sacrificing his arm just to dodge the attack. Raon had used his best assassin technique to end it all, but even that wasn't enough. This video ends here, but the story isn't over yet. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next part.